We missed my wonderful intro, but anyways, we'll record the rest of this meeting. Okay, so first Mark will talk about that, and then I'll follow up by talking about what I learned about design from Robin Williams. Next, we'll talk about images and principles to make sure that our presentations don't suck energy and joy, but rather help share it. Okay, and then one more that I really want to get to is just say no and yes. So some do's and don'ts about presenting. Okay, so those are the little mini presentations that we're planning to do for sure. But we have a few more that we can do based on demand. Okay, so the next one would be one on starting and finishing presentations well. So often the beginning and the ending of the presentations, even though they are so important, they're often neglected. They aren't really planned for very well. Just, oh, hi, I'm Daniel Beck. Today I'm going to talk about. Thank you for listening. And everyone's, that energy and joy gets sucked out. Also, we can talk about preparing the message of a presentation. And there's a book called Make It Stick. And it has a lot of great stuff about making your message memorable. And we can talk specifically about fonts and you know, font size and font choices are things that often derail the enjoyment in the presentation. And next, if there's a demand for it, we can talk about question and answer time, how to control this. And now, this might not be as useful for your students' presentations, but it might. But also, we might cover it because you might be interested in how to handle question answer time yourself, like when you're giving a presentation at a conference or in front of your class. Okay, that is the intro.
Maybe the thing about punch at the end if there's time, right?
Oh, oh no, punch is part of the beginning and ending presentation as well.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
All right. So again, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please put them in the chat as we're doing this. And unless there's something that someone's just dying to say right now, we're going to hand it over to Mark.
Okay. Before I really start, I want to emphasize when we were talking about the title, presentations that don't suck energy and joy. I mean, obviously the wordplay is in there, but I also want to emphasize, and it was Daniel that added the words energy and joy to it, but we both really, really believe that. For many teachers and for many students, you know, presentations are these scary things. Well, no, not if you get good at it. It's presenting is a wonderful way to share, and they can actually be joyful. And both Daniel and I present a lot, but we also teach presentation skills to our students. So that's based on that's the basis of a lot of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about Presentation Zen, the book and the video, the DVD. How many of you, can I ask just a show of hands? How many of you already know Presentation Zen? Lots of people, because this is Japan. A lot of people in Japan and in sort of the greater JALT network are totally aware of it. Go to a conference in another country and they probably won't be. So let me put on a PowerPoint. And where is slideshow? Play from start. Now I'm using the word PowerPoint, but this applies just as much to PowerPoint or to Keynote. And I put up the Apple logo instead of the Keynote logo because if you're, just about everybody knows the PowerPoint logo. If you're not a Keynote user, you probably wouldn't know what the Keynote logo means. So that's why I used Apple. But apply to both. I don't think what I'm going to say applies very much to Prezi because that's such a different piece of software. And I will start out, like many people do, by mentioning death by PowerPoint, which when I've mentioned this to students, some of them think that it's my term, and it's certainly not. I made this slide a couple of years ago, and if you at that time, if you went to Google and Google death by PowerPoint, you got about 7 million results. Now, death by PowerPoint puts you well over 100 million results. So that is an epidemic, and we see it a lot. And so bad slides ahead. I want to give you a couple of really bad examples. This is Bill Gates launching Microsoft Live platform. And what's wrong with this? Well, for starters, there are 25 pieces of information, visual pieces of information on one slide, which means a couple of things. By the time you get down to those other devices in the bottom right corner, you have forgotten what you read at the top. And you have no idea what he really wants you to look at. And the part that I find really absurd is this is Bill Gates, like one of the richest people in the world, and slides are free. And even if they weren't free, he owns the company. Why on earth would you put all of that junk on one slide? Contrast it with Steve Jobs, who's famous for his very, very simple PowerPoint. You know exactly what he wants you to look at. And the next slide has a reputation of perhaps being the worst slide ever. As you know, the American military is in Afghanistan and having a bit of problem. So they hired a consultant to analyze it and give them a visual presentation, because we understand visual input better than written input, and a visual presentation explaining the problem in Afghanistan, and this is it. And yeah, I mean, don't worry if you can't see it. I can't see it either. The only thing that amazes me is the company that did this put their name in the corner. I mean, if I had anything to do with a slide that looked like that, I would, you know, so much not have my name on it. So those are a few bad examples, but let's, okay. The answer is to simplify, or an answer, a strategy is to simplify. And a few years ago, I discovered Gar Reynolds' Presentation Zen, which is a wonderful book. I made the mistake of reading it on the airplane on the way to TESOL in the States. And I spent the next 5 days realizing how dreadful most PowerPoints are, or Keynote, I would say most PowerPoints are. Keynote makes it easier to be better, but it's very possible to be bad on both. And so what I'm going to, anyway, how bad most PowerPoints were, including my own. So I'm going to tell you this at the beginning. What I'm about to do is embarrass myself, because I'm going to show you, this presentation is PowerPoint, presentations and PowerPoint before and after. I'm going to show you some slides done by kind of the default mode, and then how I've tried to improve them using presentations and principles. And there is a handout on the OTJ website that summarizes like 9 of my main takeaways. If you want to copy it and give to your students, you're certainly welcome to. There are a couple of Japanese versions of Presentation Zen available. One is Simple Prezen, and another is just called Presentation Zen, but it's in Japanese. Okay. idea number one, photos are stronger than clip art. It used to be clip art was pretty much standard, but photos are stronger. And I was doing stuff about sensory modalities, about the senses, and it's a very standard format. It's a bullet points. We have the 5 ideas, and I just used clip art, visual, so picture of an eye, auditory for picture of an ear, etc. After reading presentations, then I redesigned the deck, and it became this. I simply used photographs of the same body parts, eye, ear, touching, but notice how much stronger this is than that. That you don't feel anything about. This you feel like you're sort of connecting with that person who's looking at you, listening to you, licking you, whatever, okay? Anyway, the idea is pictures. Here's another one for a presentation on physical activity in the classroom with a background design that has nothing at all to do with my topic. It's just some circles. Why did I pick it? I don't know. It's just, I did. This is what it became. Let's get physical. We see some young people being very physically active. This slide's going to come back. It can be improved more, but I think you feel, hopefully you feel more like you're part of it and more you're interested in it. Do a thing on pronunciation. And let's face it, pronunciation is usually not the most rock and roll topic in the language classroom. But I asked my students, where does pronunciation begin? And somebody will say the mouth, and you say, yeah, and then you wait, and they look at you, and then eventually somebody might say, well, lips and teeth and tongue and voice box and lungs, and all of those are true. And I say, yeah, but I think pronunciation begins in the mind. Okay, redone in presentation Zen style, where does pronunciation begin? It says mouth, and yeah, and tongue, and teeth, and lips, and voice box, and lungs, but really pronunciation begins in the mind. Okay, and the idea is use big, bold photos. I so often see students will have like 4 photographs on each slide. And like I said, slides are free. Why wouldn't you make them much bigger? So here's another, this is clip art for an activity I do called body clocks. How much different does it feel when you see her doing the same pose, showing a time? Okay, this slide also has a couple other features that we'll come back to. Be very careful with animation. Now, maybe you notice on that where does pronunciation begin slide, I did have animation. I'm about to show you the most embarrassing slide in this whole presentation. And yes, I actually used this with teachers who I like. And the slide, well, I'll just show you. For an activity called Well-Balanced Students, and here's the really, really stupid part. I don't believe I did that. I tell my students to be so careful with animations. I find especially early on, students love to animate everything. And most of the time, if with a lot of animations, you don't notice what the content is. All you notice is the movement. So here's the same activity, something called Well-Balanced Students, and I just show 2 students doing the activity. Simple background. Both PowerPoint and Keynote give you a whole bunch of backgrounds. PowerPoint's getting better. They are much simpler than they used to be, but there's too much junk on it. Well, here's some examples. Here's a presentation that's it's been evolving for over 15 years, but English language teaching and the science of happiness. So I took a nice picture with a leaf, I don't know why I used a leaf, because it's natural and seems organic or something. And then a scientist with a test tube and a little smiley face. And I was doing this for Pearson. And here's the same slide redesigned. Much stronger, much more powerful. Something I find interesting is which appears simpler, this one or this one? This one actually has more words, but it's cleaner design, so it feels simpler. Here's another one, background on drill, and you'll notice because it's this is before the days of Instant Alpha, where I removed the background color, so you see the white background here. This is a quote from Peter Viney, a drill. It's a tool for boring. Here's the same idea, drill. It's a tool for boring. Lets me do the words bigger, gives me a more visual effect. Bullet points, which you all know this. Students don't know what bullet points are, so I point out that it's the dots along the side of the page. And this next slide is going to have a whole bunch of words, so I'm going to not read it to you. I'll let you read it yourself. What are bullet points? Okay, and Daniel, are you going to talk about not reading slides? Okay, cool. All right, next, a lot of you, those of you who are JOL people know I do a lot of stuff with positive psychology. Again, this slide is pretty embarrassing. These are 8 things that Sony Lubomirsky, University of California, Riverside, suggests these are behaviors of happy, mentally healthy people. You remember good things in your life, you do kind things, you thank people, you take time for friends and family, forgive, take care of your health and body, notice good things when they happen, and find ways to deal with stress and sadness. And here's an example of different people call it the rule of 6, rule of 7, rule of 8. The basic idea is, you know, no more than 6 lines, no more than 6 words per line, which is like a really, really, really stupid rule. That's still way, way too much text. And then I made it worse because I said, well, notice these things. And a lot of them are typical topics in a ELT classroom. And some of them are language functions like thanking and forgiving. And some are grammar points like remembering and noticing things as they happen. Remember past tense, notice things as they happen, the present. And then I gave extra information and like way too much. So what I do now, I go with the rule, 1 idea, 1 slide. And so I introduce those 8 ideas. Remember good things in your life. Take the time to say thank you. Do kind things. Make time for friends and family. And I'll often add the comment that I feel so sad every time I'm in a Starbucks or McDonald's and I see 2 friends sitting next to each other playing with their phones and not even acknowledging each other. When you're with your friends, be with your friends. Learn to forgive. Stay healthy. 20 minutes of aerobic exercise 3 times a week can be as strong in dealing with mild depression as psychotropic drugs. Notice good things as they happen. Learn to deal with problems. Now, I just introduced those same 8 ideas 1 at a time. Now, if I need to, I can put them together because you've already gotten the input visually. And, okay, some of these are topics. Others are grammar points. Some are functions. Okay, so making it visual, little for those of you interested in brain science, something like 70% of the neurons in your brain and body are somehow connected to visual. That is huge. A presentation should be visual, not textual. Okay, the rule of thirds, and I'm not a photographer, so I didn't, you know how like when you look in a good camera, it always has this in the lens. And I always thought that was to show you how to find the middle. It's not. Rule of thirds shows you the visually interesting points. So look at the cover of Presentation Zen. That right axis, they've got the rocks. The top axis, the title, and this is the 3rd edition. The bottom axis, the author's name. That's where your eyes go. And start looking at professionally done posters. They very often follow rule of thirds. I showed you this slide before. Notice the layout. It's not chance. The woman is on the right axis. The title is on the top axis. This picture, I mean, it's obviously a tourist picture, but it was taken by a professional. That's his job. And notice they had me on the right axis. They had the tiger on the left axis. What they're not showing you is the 2 guys that just outside of the picture who have the chain on the tiger in case it decides to eat me. Contrast, design issues, contrast. I asked the students to, and this will probably come up when Daniel's talking about fonts. If you're working on either a laptop or a standard desktop, the kind in most computer labs at school, put on your PowerPoint on regular play mode, and then walk at least 3, ideally 5 meters away and look at it. And if you can't read it, the font's too small or the contrast not very good. So going back to this slide, the contrast at the top, the title, not great. Yellow against beige, but it's not terrible. You can read it. My name at the bottom is actually very bad because some of it's against beige, some of it's against brown, some of it's against gray, and it becomes very hard to read. You can very easily fix this by putting a light screen. This is about 35% opaque. So you just make a shape, which is really easy to do in PowerPoint, and then you click on it, click on the fill, and you can adjust the opaqueness, transparency. So putting all the ideas together, I sometimes use this in positive psychology workshops. Chinese proverb, if you want to be happy for an hour, a day, etc. But let's do that one slide at a time. If you want to be, you can turn on your microphone if you'd like. If you want to be happy for an hour, the proverb says, take a nap. If you want to be happy for a day, anybody want to guess? You might have seen it on the earlier slide. My students always say, take a really long nap. That's not the answer. The answer is go fishing. You want to be happy for a month? Get married. And I point out, this is not my proverb, okay? I'm just quoting. And you want to be happy for a year. And one time I was doing a workshop on this in Egypt, and this very Erai-looking old guy in the front row with a beard, you know, down to his waist said, get married again? And that's not the answer. It's inherit a fortune. If you want to be happy for a lifetime,
plant a garden.
Okay, that would help. This is help somebody else. So help somebody else plant a garden.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. I just mentioned on the OTJ website, there's a handout that has these. These are my main takeaways. There are many, many other ideas in Presentation Zen, but these are the ones I most strongly want my students to get when, you know, for basic slide design. And you know, 15 years ago, I might have ended my part by something like this, whereas now I might end it with something like this. Thank you. That is my intro to Presentation Zen. Any questions or comments before we go on? I would think, I mean, I think Daniel and I both believe this stuff. We both break these rules with some regularity, but we were having a conversation last week, was it? And like, the point is, you got to know the rules in order to break them well. Yeah. So for example, Gar Reynolds says, don't put too many words on a slide, which I totally agree. But sometimes Sometimes I need to add more words for language support, for models, so the students know what they're supposed to do. I mean, there are ways to do this, I think. Okay, Jane just asked about scientific
Actually, it was Glenn.
presentation. Oh, was it Glenn?
And actually, right now, I have it ready.
Okay.
In the chat, Glenn. These are two really good books about presentations for more kind of wonky kind of presentations. So if you, I can show them to you. Designing science presentations, but this one's actually my favorite. It's smaller, more concise, better presentations by Schwabish. And if I don't know if I can show you in here, the title says, it even has the word wonk here. So it's really geared towards, you know, displaying information graphics. And they both acknowledge Gar Reynolds' work. But they are also geared towards more towards science or any kind of more technical area.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and I think the general thing to say about, and I can show you some examples later, but the general thing to say about it is, regardless, you know, you do have to make adjustments to your content, what you're trying to accomplish, but that doesn't mean that you ever just throw away the rules. Like, for example, of what is effective, and that's kind of the point.
Somebody, Timmy just mentioned a Bill Gates video. I'll have a look at that. I should mention Gar Reynolds has also made a video also called Presentations, and it's about, I want to say it's 45 minutes long, something like that. I think it may be out of print, but there are many copies available on Amazon Japan used. A lot of them are right around 2,000 yen. And I have my students watch it. They watch it in English with Japanese subtitles, but I think it's a worthwhile investment. Actually, I like it enough that when it went out of print, I bought an extra copy just for when I break my DVD. Okay, any other questions, comments? Anybody want to disagree? Steve, yeah.
Not disagree at all, but I was just thinking, what you've been talking about, I'm not sure, has the focus been mainly on when we teachers give presentations, or more teaching presentation skills to our students?
Yes.
Thank you, Daniel.
Both.
For me, and Daniel, maybe you want to talk about your evolution. For me, the evolution was, because I present quite a bit, reading the book, I thought, oh my God, I really have to do something about this. And then I work with it, and like, it's a whole lot more fun to do presentation. At the very beginning, we were talking about the joy. I mean, you connect with the audience much better when you have a connectable slide deck. So I started out for myself, but now I teach this to all of my students in presentation classes. And I teach in a business department, and I tell them, man, I'm using your books, which are called Present Yourself. And I stress to my students what you're trying to stress in the books. Anytime you're in business, a presentation is not just when you're up in front of a screen using PowerPoint. Anytime you're talking to a customer, a colleague, your boss, you are presenting yourself. And they need to practice, and they need to get good at it, and they can get very good at it. So I'm trying to walk the middle line. Any other? Or I'm sorry, but Daniel, did you want to answer the same question from your point of view?
No, I think you do well, and I think some of it also be covered coming up. Jose, do you have something?
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to ask if I can share my screen, Daniel?
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask, what do you guys recommend? Because there seem to be different versions of this. Number 3, and these.
The thing about number 3 is, so he wrote Presentations in Design, and then The Naked Presenter, and they're all great. But then he did revisions of the first 2. Presentations in 3 pretty much has almost everything in one volume.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's
Thank
a
you.
little bit more expensive, but it's a great, yeah, all in one is nice.
Okay, and Daniel, I think you're going to be recommending some books later.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I mean, Mark, both you and Daniel have lived in Japan for a very long time, and you have been to more than one presentation where in Japanese, and I'm not singling out the Japanese, I'm just saying that from my experience watching presentations in Japanese, the slides do tend to be text heavy.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of the ideas that I'm seeing here, I like them. But I'm wondering for our students, are we doing them a disservice by saying less text when where they're going is most likely more text?
Okay.
So I was
I'll
just curious,
go ahead.
what's your opinion on that?
I'll go ahead and jump in if you don't mind.
Please.
My take on that is, okay, first of all, what is the normal practice is terrible, right? And so I don't want to encourage following it just because that's the normal practice. However, I always qualify my rules, if you were, to say, you know, you got to do what your professor says or what your boss says. You know, you don't go out there and just like, I'm gonna just break all the rules. But I want them to know what is effective. And hopefully over time, they start taking the opportunities to do what's effective, and then that actually starts to change the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is actually happening. It's just slow.
Yeah, I mean, there is a school of thought in Japan. I mean, it's really ironic, isn't it, that this is Japan, home of wabi-sabi, home of, I mean, Japanese aesthetic is simple and beautiful, and we forget about that whenever we start to design a PowerPoint. I mean, but I mean, what Daniel said and what Colin, you just said, I totally agree with. I teach my students PowerPoint, not Keynote, even though I'm a Mac person, because they need to know how to do PowerPoint. And I start out with bad typical and just try to give them some principles. Maybe they'll be able to use it, maybe not. But I have Japanese colleagues, I said them in a business department. Some of my marketing colleagues understand this a whole lot better than, say, my economist colleagues, because they're presenting it, right? But there is a movement within Japanese aesthetics to match this. Gar Reynolds, by the way, lives in Kyoto, and he studies Zen. So the Zen does not just mean Asian cool. It is like they are actually from principles from Zen.
All right, if it's okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the next one. Some of you have seen this or a version of this next little mini presentation. So if you have, bear with me, but I thought maybe, you know, it will sink in even more. But for those of you who haven't, this might be a nice little introduction for you. So, okay, here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned in the menu, what I learned about design from Robin Williams, but not this Robin Williams. There's another Robin Williams, the author, and she's a designer, and she wrote an incredible book called The Non-Designer's Design Book. It's now in its, fourth? I think it's the fourth edition. And just like kind of with like the same evolution as the presentation Zen, her other work has kind of creeped in to make it into one volume, basically. But this book, if you're not familiar with design principles, this is the book for you. It will change your life. Get it. And you'll find yourself like just changing the way you make handouts, posters, anything. Okay, so so what did I learn from Robin Williams? Sorry, I gotta set this up here. Okay, so she, in the beginning of her book, the main chunk of her book is going over 4 design principles, and they happen to make a little acronym that makes it easy to remember. She says it's unfortunate, but I think it's actually not unfortunate, because one of the meanings of crap is bad design, actually, right? So you remember the word bad design word to remember what is good design. But if you remember these words, then you'll find yourself evaluating everything you see, and also in your own design, it will come out. Okay, so the C is for contrast. All right. Now, Mark touched on this, but the key point, or the key principle of contrast in design, is that when you make something different, make it really different. Right. So too often what happens is, okay, I have everything in 36-point font, so I'll make the title 42. And it's wimpy. It doesn't really stand out. You want to make it stand out, right? So just quickly go through some examples. So this would be like a title slide, pretty lame title slide. But here are some ways you could add contrast. One is that you could use bold. Now I bolded this, but I also made this thin, right? Because if we're going to use contrast, you make it as much as you can. Another way would be to use size. Okay, so not only did I make something bigger, I made the other things smaller. Okay, another way, of course, is color. Another way is changing the font. Okay, but make it a really different font than the rest. And for it to be contrast, you should have most everything's the same or very similar, but then something stands out. Okay, and of course, probably the best way is to combine all of those. All right, color, font, size, bold and thin. The point is, if you're going to make something different, make it really different, because then you understand why is it important. Okay, so you help the audience to understand that, and it looks better. All right, so that's the C in crap. Okay, which leads us to the R, and the R is repetition. Okay, so the idea in repetition in design is that you repeat some element of your design. So even though you're changing things, there's something familiar. So just like the terracotta soldiers in Xi'an, they're all unique. But are they from the same army? Of course, right? How do you know that? Because there's a repetition of the design, like they're wearing the same kind of armor, okay, same kinds of hats, but their faces are different, but you still know that they belong together. Okay, so that's the idea there. So one way that PowerPoint and other slides try to do this is with templates. Templates aren't terrible. They do force repetition in the design. So here's a quick example. This is from Keynote. Sorry, the animation is not as smooth for you as it is for me. But every page is different, but every page has similar features. You know it's from the same book. That's the idea. Okay, so there are different ways to establish repetition, and this is, in the case of slides, is probably over the slide deck. Right? It might be on the same slide you have some repetition, but more often than not, probably from slide to slide, you can use color. Okay, so here I add some repetition. You can use size. Okay, so I changed to have the same size. You can do it with fonts. Okay, repeating a font. Okay, or again, combining them together. Maybe the title slide is not the best example. It's usually from slide to slide. I will just say this, I'm not a huge fan of templates, especially with PowerPoint or with Google Slides. One reason is the students will tend to choose the same templates. And for me, it's like, I wouldn't want to have my presentation and the next person come up and they have the same exact template, right? So I try to encourage them to use a little creativity, maybe start with a white one or a black one, and then maybe come up with their own ways of establishing repetition. They can make their own little drawings or designs or whatever. Okay, all right, that's R. That leads us to A, which is alignment. Okay, and so the principle of alignment and design is that there should be a visual connection between the elements on your slide or on your design. Okay, and this is a kind of an alternative, non-traditional alignment, but it's still an alignment. You can see it's just not random, right? Okay, but the thing is, and this also has to do with the brain, you know, your brain notices when things are not aligned. And, you know, I'm super sensitive, but I think even most people are just notice. And it can be kind of like, oh, what's wrong here, right? So if I point out with these little lines here, I can make it really clear that nothing was aligned. And my eyes don't know where to go. But if I align them, right, then it forms a sharp line. Your eyes follow it, and just everything seems more peaceful, I guess. Okay, now the typical way to align, almost everyone does it, is the default centered. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You may be looking for a formal, you know, calm alignment. That might be your purpose, but I always tell my students to try some other alignments also, because maybe you might find that there's something even more effective. Also, if you know in the centered alignment, you kind of know where the line is, but it's not really clear, right? So here again with my title slide, there's no alignment, it's terrible. Here it's centered, okay, at least I can breathe now. But here, if I put them all on the left, right, I have this nice clean line, right? And this is fine, but why settle for that? You could even try another more non-traditional alignment, for example, right aligned, and it's different, right? So I don't tell students what to do, just, you know, try different things, right? Learn from Uncle Steve, right? That think different, yeah. So just try different things to find out what works best for yours. Don't just settle for the default. Okay. All right, brings us back to crap and to P, which is proximity. Okay. So the idea is that, of course, is that the elements that are similar in concept should also be physically close together. All right. One of my examples is, you know, people who separate their M&Ms by color. Okay, you put them together by proximity. But let's look at it. Here you have an idea. Go to the title slide again. Now I could ask you, okay, what is the connection between each line? Okay, you're all educated people. You'll figure it out. But why am I the presenter making you figure it out? Why don't I just make it really clear to you? All right, so when I physically put the subtitle and title together, when I physically put my name and institution together, then the connection is clear, right? And so that's one thing you can do with proximity. Another thing you can do, and we'll talk about soon, is you create this empty space here. Designers love this space, okay? It's often called negative space. Sometimes it's called white space, but that's usually because it's white paper, but it's actually negative space. This lets the design breathe. And then if you needed to add another element, this might be a really good place to place that element. Okay. So I add a little bit more contrast and a little bit more contrast, right? And then just by using these four CRAP, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, then I can have an interesting design that follows different principles. Okay, so thank you. Were there any questions right now?
I think Brick had his hand up a little while ago. I don't know if Brick is still there.
I don't see any hands up. Let's do the chat first. There's a few people here.
Yeah, I had my hand up, but that was for Mark's thing.
Oh, okay.
Just talking about academic presentations, because when I did my PhD, I did a thing following all the Zen rules and stuff, going through the defense presentation, and then my supervisors said no, 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 no. I had to have texts and references and everything, and so there is a balance. And like Mark said, you got to, or actually Dan, I guess you said, you got to do what your teacher wants, but
Yeah.
It is something to be aware of. That was all. Thank you.
No, that's a really good point. And yeah, that's exactly it. You got to know your audience, right? And what's expected of you. So the key here, I think, with this is just for you to know what are the principles of good design, and then you have to kind of figure out when and how to use it. That would be a different side issue, I think. Let me look real quickly here.
Okay, I've been trying to watch the chat, and there's not much. Oh no, wait, some more come up.
Yeah, a few things here.
Well, I had a question about eye tracking. Is it okay to ask?
Sure.
Okay. Well, years ago, I went to a really good presentation at Joe, and the guy was talking about how our eyes move when we read, and that our eyes, contrary to popular belief, when we read, it's not left to right, but really from upper right to bottom left. So it goes this way, kind of from the top right to the bottom left. And I was just wondering if you guys had come across this at all in your research in slide design, or anything about eye tracking and how does the eye read the slide?
I haven't, but what I would say, my thought on that would be, that would be a much more, well, I think it's a relevant issue, but especially be more relevant if you have a lot of text, which is something that we're kind of preaching against. So I think it's good to be aware. I mean, it's good to be aware of how the mind works and such. I'm not familiar so much with how that would work, but
yeah, I'm not either. Other than the fact that when I was talking, I said, I'm going to show you a slide with a lot of text. I'm not going to read it to you because you can't read aloud at the same speed that you read silently. So you would be reading it at a different speed than I would be saying it. And Daniel, you had an interesting idea the other day when we were talking. Do you want to mention that, or is that coming up later?
What's that?
A different reason to not read.
Oh, yeah. I think maybe come to that later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, Glenn. Something about black background and neon yellow text. Yeah. I think that's a good point. It matters a little bit about the context of where this is being shown, and maybe this is a good time to bring this up. If you're in a brightly lit classroom and you have dark and white, it has one effect. But then if you're in a dark room, it has a very different effect. And that can make things a little bit difficult. So for example, if you're in a room where it's really dark where the presenter is, and then you have black text on a white screen, that's also trouble, right? Because now you got this bright light shining out at everybody and they're trying to make out the black text. So yeah, you got to keep those kind of things in mind. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you need to have two sets of of slides for depending on where you're presenting, but it is good to know the context of where you're going to present and see if that might have an influence on how you design it.
2 or 3 things related. This is a lot of modern classrooms designed for presentations have a separate light bank that you can turn off that kills the light that is that goes on the screen. But I have found at a number of universities, nobody's noticed when I've just removed the light bulbs for the semester that are sending a big light right onto the screen, which washes it out. The other thing I want to mention is Alex Burke did an interesting presentation on Wednesday, I think, on among other things, dyslexia and how dyslexics are processing it. And a colored background is easier for a lot of people to read than black on white, which is so stark. And so that's something to think about also. It makes it a little trickier when you're designing slides because it means you got to go through and get rid of the background on all the pictures, so that you don't have these, you know, ugly white squares in the middle of stuff. But definitely, do you want to say anything quickly about that, Alex? Or but definitely go back and check out the video of Alex's presentation whenever those are available.
They're available
just,
now.
Yeah, just briefly, the color range in Chalkboards is really easy to look at. So there's sort of like that sort of deep sort of blue, blue-green to sort of gray-green color. The very deep color is really easy to look at. And even in a bright room, if you've got light-colored text and you've got that dark background, it's going to be easy to read, basically. And almost any color you want to offset against it is going to really pop out. But it's quite, it seems to be easy to read. And my experience in the classroom is I've never seen kids who can't actually read a blackboard. I have seen kids who can't read a whiteboard, but not a blackboard. And all my slides are usually in that sort of dark greeny, very, very dark ocean green color. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, interesting. If you're interested in that whole issue of color, there's a book called Reading by the Colors by, I don't remember her first name, her last name is Irlen. I-R-L-E-N, I think. It's a little bit controversial, but it's interesting.
Helen Irlen.
Helen, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Those are great points. Also, yeah, you mentioned about right alignment, top, bottom, and zoom. Yeah, I wasn't really focused on that, but yeah, that's a really good point. Like maybe that's, again, similar to knowing your context. It's not always on a screen in a classroom or a conference center. It could be on Zoom. Where is the presenter's face going to be? You might want to keep those things in mind. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, did I miss anything here? I think we're ready to move on. All right. Okay, so this next one I wanted to do is fairly short, so I think we can just get to this quickly and kind of continue on in the same vein.
Okay, can I say something before I forget?
Yep.
When I talk presentation, I would always remind students to remember that if they're going to have handouts, that sometimes what works well for on the slide doesn't work well on a handout, and they might actually have to have two different versions of the presentation, one that can be printed and one that they'll be displaying.
Yeah, that's a good point. Personally, I'm opposed to printing out slides. So I actually teach my students to design a handout. They have to design that separately because they have different purposes. But yeah, you're right. It can't just do the same thing necessarily. To the next one, Jane, I think you had something.
Okay. Hi everybody. I'd just like to jump in as a scientist. A lot of people have been saying science profs do this, or I think it was Brick talked about his his PhD prof is you can't do that for a PhD defense. I've been teaching scientific presentation skills on a PhD course at QDI for 10 years. And along those 10 years in the middle, I ended up doing a PhD in dental science. So I can see it from sitting through the lectures with profs that have unbelievable amount of crap on their slides and having to do monthly seminars to present my research when I'm dealing with data from 200 plus patients. So I would say, obviously no one's going to change overnight, but I started my job in 2010 and 7 years later I did my PhD defense. I did not have one bullet point. Maybe I'm the first person in Japan to do their PhD defense without a single bullet point. And the professors now are seeing, I teach a third year sort of a mini dental project where the purpose is to give a research presentation in addition to the PhD students. And over the last 10 years, the professors have become a lot more flexible, and the younger sort of researchers coming up are changing the culture. So don't say you can't do this or think that someone can't do this. I tell my PhD students, we're going to learn this in this class, make it into your own style, and then present it at a monthly meeting and see what feedback you get. If you have to change it, change it. But you've got to be sort of somewhere in between. They shouldn't do 100% that professor's style. It's even in a Western university, you shouldn't copy your professors. You need to make your own style, your own culture. So take things gradually and sort of look for the long term, maybe 5 years on. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow. But yeah, you can present a PhD in Japan without a single bullet point. I think one of the, what do you call them, examiners nearly had a heart attack. He's like, and I'm like, no, no bullet points, sorry, no. But anyway, yeah, just a comment from a science point of view. Thank you.
Jane, that was great.
Thank you,
Thanks. Jane. Yeah, thanks. That's awesome. Yeah, I think the same thing. Like, you know, some of you may be familiar with Neil Postman, education writer, and one of his books was called "Teaching as a Subversive Activity," and so I think of it in that vein, right? Like change. You said the change won't happen tomorrow, but it can happen. It can happen over time.
I got a question for you, and it's not maybe open up for everybody. We've all seen, I think most of us have been here for a while. We've all seen people who have done really good jobs with presentations and their slides. For example, for me, I think of Greg Hadley. I've really enjoyed watching his presentations. He does his slides are just incredible for me. They really work for me. I was just wondering, for other people, is there anybody out there that really sticks in your head as having really good slides for when they are giving presentations?
I've heard about this Daniel Beck guy.
Mark Helgeson guy. He's not here anymore, but John Gunning had really good presentations. Yeah, his were stunning. Terry Fellner, yeah, they are out there. Yeah.
Curtis Kelly.
I can't. Yes. Okay. There you go. Thanks, Mark Helgeson. So.
Well, right. I think part of it, you know, like, okay, there are always going to be just how I'm not going to do a show of hands here, but really ask yourself this question: how many of us as teachers have even read one book on slide design or on presentation? Most of us haven't, and there are a bunch of good books out there. I mean, it's hey, we're teachers. We read stuff.
I read presentations then, but going back about 5-10 years ago, when I was looking around for when I first started doing presentation classes, the number of books that were out there, they were mostly on public speaking, not on slide design. Maybe it was just me, but I think this slide design as a topic is something relatively new, isn't it?
I'd say there's been a lot published relatively recently.
Yeah. I mean, there's Garvin Reynolds, but also there's Nancy Duarte, who's more professional designer, and she designed the slides for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, and other ones like that. And that's really had an impact on people because she's not only done those, she's taught people how to do those. And so it is spreading and spreading.
Yeah, she did Slideology. Yeah. She did Resonate, I think.
She's got a few others, yes.
Yeah.
There's Slideology and Resonate, and there's a few others. Illuminate. All right. If you don't mind, I'm gonna jump into
good idea.
Images. This one won't take long, and hopefully.
Daniel, I think you have a hand raised. Mike Lyons. No.
Oh yeah, Mike, you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you and Mark. Do you ever ask your students at the beginning of your courses, what do you guys think makes a good slide? Or what do you guys think makes a good presentation?
Yeah. Definitely the first question. What do you think makes a good presentation? We always talk about.
Yeah, that's
what kinds of things do the students come up with?
They're often stumped.
It's loud. I mean, because that's their image of it. Because most of my students don't have a concept of using their voice. They just like, I got to speak loud. I usually, for my first class of the year, I couldn't do it this year because we were remote, but my first class of the year, I usually break a board in half with karate chop, just to kind of like, what the hell's that? And then the last class of the year, they do it. So it's, and that fits into something Daniel's going to talk about if we get to the punch.
Yeah, I don't know how many of these we're going to get to, but let's just do images real quick. Okay. Okay. Okay, so Mark did talk about the importance of images, big images, and we can talk a little bit about that. Here we have a slide, and it's from NASA. It's pretty good. I want you to ask you though, what do you think is more effective, this one or this one? Just a quick poll. What do you think? Put a foot of a finger, one or two.
You line
most people seems like most people are going with two, and I would agree. It's really powerful. Here you have the astronaut, and he or she is facing this way out from the Earth, and it's just empty space. And it gets you thinking, where is this person going? But another good thing about it is, and I mentioned this before, is negative space. Okay, so negative space is a good thing. It lets your eyes rest. Unfortunately, textbook publishers don't always get this point. They just fill everything to the very max. But it's good to let your eyes rest. But it has other purposes too. So anyways, negative space, right? So you can create it in different ways. You can look for images that allow you to do this. Just keep in mind, it's a good thing. Don't have to fill every empty space. Okay. So here's
Daniel, could I say one thing?
Yeah.
Could you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it depend on what your message is?
Yeah. As Mark said, every rule can be broken.
No, I mean, if your message, if you're trying to give a presentation or you're trying to focus on the idea that Earth is our home, it's so important to us, then I think the first slide would be better.
That's
but if
totally.
Your message is the opposite, then the second slide is better.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think I'm just going for
But I think that's important to ask yourself, what's my message?
No, of course, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And I always try to make that qualifier whenever I'm teaching any of these points.
Yeah.
I just want to get them introduced to the ideas and then say, but you really got to think about it. You got to be deliberate. That's really the key, I think.
The point is we're talking about designing these, not just, let's paste in a picture.
Right. Okay, so here we have another picture that's really tight. But if you open up here, right, you can see there's a lot of space here. It's not actually white, but it still is negative space. And then if you had a message, it might be a nice little place to place it. Okay, another one that Mark mentioned is rule of thirds, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But it's actually from, I think, originally from painting, but then carried over to photography. And if you look at a lot of classic paintings, you'll notice that the subject is not centered, but rather it's off center. And it makes a more interesting focal point. So one way here is I just moved the slide over, but here what I do is since I have so much space to work with, in this particular case, I just chose to create the rule of thirds for this image by narrowing in. Okay, next one is to let your images bleed. And so bleeding comes from photography. Back, all of us old timers, if we went to the photo lab, you had to bleed the image off of the print. And so the idea is really to fill the screen. So like if I was going to start a advertising campaign for my new burger place, I say, try the mega burger. I show this slide to my students that are like, whatever. And I say, okay, try the mega burger. Okay. And I stole this idea from Garth Reynolds. So yeah, if you've seen it before, this is where I got it. And they all go, oh yeah. And I say, it's the exact same photo, right? What's different though, right? It's gone off the screen. Your brain actually fills in the rest of it. Okay, so here you are, and you go, okay, I've got this photo, and Daniel said to bleed it. So how can I do that? Well, of course, it doesn't have to be an image, doesn't have to actually go off the screen, it just fills the screen. Then you can kind of imagine the rest of this field, other horses and such. All right, but then you get someone who goes, okay, I'm going to do that. I've got this photo. I've got a horse too. All right, let me bleed it by stretching it out, and oh, look at all those pixels. All right, so something to teach them, right, is you want to have the resolution, enough resolution to do that. Okay, so I tell them the magic number, at least in most projectors, is 1024/768, but we won't focus on that. Okay, and then one last little thing about images is I do ask them to credit their sources if they didn't make it themselves, if they didn't take the photo themselves, but I tell them to just name the source. I don't want a URL on the screen, and that's kind of the default. And again, that goes back to professors. A professor insists you have the whole URL on the screen, you better do it. Otherwise, you better not, because no one is going to look up that URL, right?
Ever.
But if you show the source, and again, this is a case where you can break the rule. Your text can be small, because really you're just acknowledging that you have the information where you got it, and it was a legitimate source. Okay, that's all for this one. So, yes, I think Mike is first. Question, Mike? Or
No, his hand is just up.
Your hand's just up. Jose.
Okay, can I share screen again, Daniel?
Yep, keep it short.
I'm going to keep it real short. I just want to tell everyone that when I was doing my website, Goldfish 365, I had to learn to find royalty clip art and royalty-free photos.
Yeah. And
these are the most reliable places where I've found them. And I will put these into the chat one by one. First one is Pixabay, very good search engine, and also has clip art and royalty-free photos. Photos for Class is an excellent resource because it actually amalgamates all of these places that I'm about to show you. And they focus on Creative Commons and royalty-free artwork. Unfortunately, some of it gets mired in stuff that's on Wikipedia and Wikimedia. Unsplash is excellent. Again, clip art and photos. Pexels is excellent. I boiled it down to all the places that I could really rely on. Creative Commons search can help you find stuff that you can't find on Pixabay. And then more unique stuff. NASA is all royalty-free. All of their images, all of their videos are government owned. Thus, they become royalty-free on the internet. NASA's other image library sometimes doesn't have the same stuff on those two sites. There's free images on, now it's called Free Images. It was a different name before, but anyway, good name, Free Images. And then Japanese photos from, does anyone remember how the acronym METI goes? METI, Ministry for, I think it was the Tourism Ministry, METI. And they're harder to use because they're trying to do PR for Japan. But there's some beautiful images here. If you need NHK type, let's calm everybody down images for backgrounds and stuff like that. And then the good old dependable Wikimedia site where you can use everything that's inside Wikipedia to search their media stuff. I will be posting these in chat. Here you go.
Okay, thanks a lot. John, you have something real quick?
Yeah, your attribution that you had for the guitar, you had words. I normally just tell my students to do a number and then put a reference at the end of the set of slides with the URL. That's because it takes up even less space, but it is an attribution for, so I guess personal choice or whatever. I just like it because it takes up less real estate on the picture.
Okay, good. Yeah, great. As long as there's some way for them to just acknowledge that they're not claiming that this is their own photo and that they have the information for you. Yeah. I'll just say one thing really quickly. I abhor the slide with the references. But again, if the professor or the boss says, I need to see that slide, okay. I don't tell them don't make it. I tell them don't show it. Don't show it on the screen. Because again, nobody is going to write that down. But if you acknowledge that references are available, I can send them to you. you maybe have the slide, but you just don't show it in the class. Glenn, you had something.
Yeah, I've run across in my years at this university a handful of students that are excellent artists.
Yes.
And just in general,
yeah,
students here in this country are.
Yep.
What are both of your feelings about using students' art?
You mean the student using their own art?
Nope.
Oh, what do you mean?
Like if you're making a book yourself or a journal article or whatever you want to make, and you would like to include or use the students' art in there. It's
if you get permission and such. Is that
so
what you mean?
you just simply attribute it to the
I mean,
name.
yeah, you can work that out. Then you maybe explain to them what the issues are, but you know, if they are willing to do that and give you permission, then yeah. Okay.
I think even if we run out of time,
yeah.
Daniel, I hope you can go through at least.
You wanted the punch?
Well, whatever you've seen your different sessions. I haven't, but just say no sounds really important.
Okay, well, why don't we do that one? Okay. Okay, and then we're going to try to rifle through these basically. Okay, so just say no and yes. So do's and don'ts of presenting. Okay, again, these are rules that may be broken, but you should know that they're usually not a good idea. Okay, so just say no. Oh, I should turn this on. To endless bullet points. Jane says no bullet points at all. I'm totally down with that. But definitely not just reams and reams of bullet points. That's just crazy. Especially if they're not animated. If you have them all up there, then your audience is going to read them all and they're going to wonder, why are you so slow? All right. So if you have bullet points, you're going to have to animate them as you speak. And I rarely use bullet points. I might use them for summary, like something that they've already dealt with, maybe in that case. Yeah. Okay. So again, if you do use it, animate it. And usually speak it first and then show it. All right. So I'm talking about bullet point 3 now, and now I'll talk about bullet point 4. Okay. But the best is Jane's solution, my solution. No more bullets if possible. Okay. End the violence. Okay, so a better way, Mark already touched on this, I totally agree. Best way is one slide, one idea. Okay, so yeah, as he said, slides are free. You use many. Okay, also say no. No, this one is not from Gar Reynolds. This one's from Robin Williams. The underline tool. By that I mean you highlight the word and you do Command U, or you go to the edit and pull down Command U. This is really bad typography. It's a throwback to the typewriter, but that does not mean you can never underline. Instead, if you're going to underline, make the underline, right? So I drew the underline where I wanted to draw it. Okay, but the original underline is from typewriting, and that's when there were very few ways to show contrast. All right, so you wanted to emphasize the word. But now we have just so many colors, fonts, sizes. So I tried to de-emphasize underlining. Okay, distracting backgrounds. Okay, please avoid this at all costs. I would say this is a rule never to break unless you're doing a presentation on bad presentations. Okay, the next one has to do with more with delivery. So this is kind of a tribute to speaking of speech. You know, don't dance, don't touch your hair, don't touch your face, don't rub your hands. So this is just about having good posture. Okay, and I'm not even sure what this is here. Oh, needless, pointless animation. All right, if you're going to animate, it should be a purpose, right? And most of your animation should either be appear or dissolve. unless the animation really suits the message. There are some cases. It's pretty rare. All right. This is another delivery one, right? Don't sit there and read. Now, in this case, this woman is reading off paper. Same problem of reading off the slides. Don't read your presentation slide to the audience. They've already finished reading. You're still reading. Your back is to them. You're looking up at the screen. You're not engaged with them. Okay. So what I tell students is, I tell them to practice, but not to memorize. But what I find is that when you practice, and especially if you have feedback, like let's say you record your practice, and then you watch your practice and go, oh, I tripped up on that word, or I didn't say that as smooth as I wanted to. You can often figure out another way to say it or a way to remember it that's smoother and more natural. So that's better than reading, of course. Okay, we already.
Can I just stop you for a second though?
Yeah, yeah.
With regard to that, one thing that's really interesting, if you have your students video themselves practicing, what they'll find out is that where they normally get stuck tends to be the same place.
Yeah.
So if they know where they're going to get stuck, and they have some sort of way of
yes,
making themselves okay, coming up to a stuck point.
Yep. Yep.
Then that's a very good way for teachers to help their students. Just wanted to say that.
That's awesome. You know, many of you are probably familiar with Anders Ericsson and deliberate practice, and that's one of the things is you try something, you get some feedback, and then you work on your weakness, right? And so you find, okay, this is a spot I'm always getting stuck. So, you know, I'm going to spend time right on this little spot right here. I'm going to work it, get better at that, and then do the whole thing. Yeah, so very good. Thanks. Okay, Mark already covered death by PowerPoint. We already had the cheesy slides that are low resolution. Okay, I already got these. And what else do I have? Okay, let's go to the say yes. Okay, again, a lot of these are delivery, but have good posture, make eye contact, which is harder to do on Zoom, obviously. And I tell my students, practice looking at the camera when you speak. All right. Then if you need to check your slide, look at the camera again, and just use that as, just imagine that is your audience looking at the camera.
One thing I point out about eye contact when we're face to face, eye contact triggers oxytocin, which is the hugging hormone, or it creates the human connection. And you can
sorry, let me jump in real quick. Let me acknowledge that it's 5 o'clock. So if you need to leave, we totally understand. We're going to try to put links and I'll try to make slide shares of a lot of these shows so that you could check out again. We'll put them in the OTJ or this page for this on Facebook. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you who can. But anyway, no, eye contact triggers oxytocin, which is how you connect with people. And if you want to prove it when you're face to face, eye contact's really tricky on Zoom. But when you're face to face, make eye contact with somebody too long, and it feels really creepy because you feel like you're because it's the oxytocin from someone who doesn't have the right.
Right. Okay. Like invasion of privacy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide is controversial, but just to have a little fun. Okay, but you want to have good gestures. Now, this might not be your model, but you know, it's an example of gestures, right? Good voice inflection, and a lot of those things should be again practiced, right? It shouldn't be overly robotic where you like, oh, I got 3, you know, but by practicing it. Trying to figure out what gestures feel natural to you at the time and so on. Same thing with when to inflect your voice. It's really hard for a language learner. So it does require practice, but they too can learn to do this. I'm almost through it. Jose, I'll let you ask your question then if you don't mind. Okay, I did effective visuals, and I think that's, hold on, let me just make sure if there's anything. No, I think that's it. Oh. And this is not relevant so much with Zoom, but if you present in front of an audience, you ought to use a remote and hopefully one that's small. It's not like, you know, this huge weldy TV remote. Yeah, like Mark has the Ring remote.
I'm doing a Ring remote, which is really nice because, like, if you have a remote in one hand and a microphone in the other hand and a pen in the other hand, you're screwed. So, like,
that's right. Jose, you had your hand raised.
Just a couple things, because you're talking about remotes. Your iPhone can connect to your Mac to become a remote for Keynote. So just so you can save a little bit of money. The original reason why I raised my hand was something I discovered when I was actually teaching synchronous classes on Zoom. And Mark can confirm this because he was talking about this, I believe, in his last presentation about how we get Zoom fatigue. Mark, I think you were talking about Zoom fatigue. And it's because we don't have the clarity of when we're right in front of somebody and you can see the crow's feet when somebody smiles, and you can see the proper wrinkles when somebody smiles. And that creates a degree of Zoom fatigue. What I think I discovered, and I don't have any data to confirm this, was that when I was trying to be more emphatic and empathic with my students, that learning how to almost exaggerate your smiles and exaggerate your empathy, like really smiling to your students, doing it so that then they understand that, and which is also important when you're masked up face to face. I noticed that I could tell, after I got used to it, I could tell when a student was smiling even when they were masked up because of their eyes.
Yeah.
And they need you to really smile with your eyes because they can't see the smile, the grin on your face. You learn to gesture more, you learn to be more emphatic, you learn to be, you shouldn't get to the point of comical exaggeration. But if you want your students to understand what you're doing, either over the barrier of Zoom or over the barrier of a mask, try to accentuate your gestures and your emotions via your face.
I've ordered, we're going face-to-face at my school in 2 weeks. God knows how long that'll last. But anyway, I have, for my presentation students, ordered masks with a little window here. Part of it is like, well, what else am I going to spend money on this year? We can't travel. But anyway, it just seemed like a good purchase.
Yeah. All right. Let me just say, just throw this out there real quickly, and then I'm in no hurry to leave, but maybe some people are. But I did want to say something just very quickly about starting and finishing presentations, and it's something that I think is really important for my classes. And if you get presentations in, it's now in Presentation Zen, and originally it was in Naked Presenter, and that is, he calls something called punch, which is basically how to make a good hook in the presentation. And so something personal, unexpected, novel, challenging, or humorous. By challenging, he means challenging the beliefs of the people in the audience. So not so much important about which of, the punch, so much as having a deliberate beginning that grabs the attention of your audience. And I would say, at least for practice, I would say to my students, I don't even want you, I'm telling you not to start with, hi, I'm Daniel Beck. Today I'm going to talk about. In fact, I often tell them they don't have their title slide up. They might, let's say their title slide has a photo. It might have the title without the title on it, just the photo. They give their little intro, the hook, and then they show the title and say, today I'm going to talk about this, right? Because everybody does the, hi, I'm so-and-so, today I'm going to talk about. Everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah. But if you do something to grab their attention, draw them in, and then show that. Okay, but the key point is being deliberate. All right, and then the same thing for finishing is not to come to the end and go, okay, point 3, 1, 2, 3, yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. That's what the audience does. Instead, you finish with something along the lines of, I've presented this and this and this, and if you only remember one thing from today's presentation, please remember that you must go out and do this.
Vote this year.
And you pause.
For example.
You pause. Thank you. And then just reflexively, everyone's ready to go. So again, plan that. And we didn't do the question answer one, but I usually say, save that for after the question answer, right? So you kind of give a summary of what you talked about. Okay, now are there any questions? Question. And then you control that time. If you're running out of time, respect the next speaker. Say, I'm sorry, come see me after, but let me finish off with 1 point.
Can I add 2 points on that? Because that, okay. Number one, question and answer. What I found with students, basically, student presentations, there probably aren't going to be any questions. So if you need the feedback, you can build it in with a show of hands survey. You know, like, so how many of you have been exhausted this semester with online teaching? And like everybody's going to raise their hand, right? But that's a way to,
Both hands.
Instead of waiting for questions, put the ideas in their head. The other thing that Daniel said, yeah, respect the next presenter's time. So we're lucky we're all in separate rooms this time, so people can. And Daniel did say, if you need to go, please go. But if you're at a conference, you never run over time. And if you get a cowboy, which can take many different forms, it can be the person who wants to make a little mini speech in the guise of a question, or just off the wall say, that's a great point, but I'm sorry we don't have time. Can we talk afterwards?
Yes.
So you're not calling them an idiot, but you're acknowledging that, you know, yeah, we can talk, but we don't have time right now. And it can usually diffuse it. You don't, 30 years ago in JAL, we had a lot of cowboys, not really so much anymore.
Yeah, and you know, we keep whipping this line, but Presentation Zen has some really great tips about dealing with question answers. On the one hand, you want to be gracious. You want to be patient with the questions and the questioners. But on the other hand, you want to be assertive. Like, you do not let someone commandeer the question answer time, because that's not just disrespectful for the speaker, it's disrespectful for the rest of the audience who may have something they want to ask. So you kind of have to get a little courage, step up and say, thank you, we can talk later after, but can we let's take another question.
Yeah, I just a warning, because we're all in Asia, and so many Asian countries are close together, not that we're traveling now, but many of you, I mean, I've been in different countries with many of you. Different cultures are different, and in some countries, academic questions, they attack each other. And this almost never happens in Japan, but that's just considered academic discourse. And so if it happens, it ain't you. It's like different set of expectations.
Right. Oh, and another thing, like we've said, okay, respect the time, respect the next presenter, and that often means that you have to plan to finish your presentation, let's say 5 minutes early.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have this much allotted time. You have to figure out how much time do you want to give to question answer. If there aren't many questions, no one's going to complain if you finish early, but they will complain if you go over, right? And then you remember, you saved that one last thing you're going to say. So you might grab the question answer time with 1 minute left and say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't answer any more right now. Please come see me. I'll be glad to talk to you in the hall. All right. And last point, thank you. And
right. And if the next presenter's in the room, it's really nice to say, I need to clean up here, but why don't you come and set up so we can, I mean, there's no reason that one person can't be setting up and another person tearing down at the same time.
Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you all. I mean, as you noticed, Daniel did most of the work, so thank you.
Thank you.
But thank you all for coming, and I think it's a tremendous statement about we're all exhausted from the semester, and yet everybody's been coming to sessions all week.
Yeah.
Thank you to Jose and Adam for organizing it. Thank you all.
You're the only friends I have nowadays.
And speaking of having a drink with friends, Jose, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, you know what I want to say? I want to say thank you. I look familiar, Mark?
I've seen that.
And I will reveal the inside joke to that tonight at 8 p.m. The URL for the OTJ weekly social, I'll just call it a social. There's something else that we do there, but I'll just call it the social as an open invitation to
We do
all of my
social
new
distancing, you mean?
Unfortunately, it is distancing. I would like to be in a pub with all of you, but it's the best we can do, and we usually have a very, very good time. It is the cap to what has been, as Mark said, a wonderful week, and we can get together and still talk shop if you really wanna, or you can just become even better friends by spending a few hours relaxing.
Sorry, Jose, where's that link?
Okay, I'm going to put that in OTJ. I'm going to get David to put it up as an announcement. So
John,
That's what I was just going to ask.
John, I
Okay,
noticed your hand
so
is
just
up.
go to OTJ main page.
I'll tell you what. You know what? Give me 30 seconds, and I'll give it to you right now.
While Jose's doing that, John, did you have a question or something? Your hand's up.
Yeah, I just was going to mention, I teach my students AGO and AGC, attention getting opener and attention getting closer, which is kind of what you said in different terms, but it's a very good technique. Get something that they can grab the audience with at the end, and something they can leave the audience with at the end. So
Okay, guys, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I can't find the link, so I will put it on OTJ. But if you're an OTJ member, regular OTJ member, just look under mental health and well-being, which is where I keep all of the social information. Okay, look at that. But I will put it up as an announcement, so it'll make
Jose,
it.
it's the same, it's the regular link, right?
Yep, it's a recurring meeting. Just hit it if you've already hit it before.
I've got it here. I can post it.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's the one from last week, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the one for every week until Christmas.
Yeah, it's the way. And we will, I hope, be all together on Christmas, at least for a little bit in that same room. That would be wonderful.
Here we go. Here's the. Is that okay? Just the short version. I think nobody's gonna. Do you want the long?
What do you mean the short? You should probably put in. What do you mean the short version?
I mean, this is the one where you go to Zoom and meeting ID rather than the long URL.
You should probably, more importantly, you should put in the URL. You don't really need that meeting ID. You don't really need the password. You need the URL more. But I'm going to get all of that on the announcement, so it's going to be covered there.
But just I want to say something in response to John. That's a great point. Really, like the key is being deliberate. And the thing with Garv Reynolds Punch, I just use that as just a device. But what I found is that my students really get into it. Like, oh, I didn't know I could, let loose and be creative and find, this new way to introduce. I think they want to have something other than just the, template. I just follow this and do this. They find ways. Same thing with like the design with repetition. I forget who it was. I think it was Glenn who was saying that about the creativity of students. I've had some students who like made repetition by using their own art that had its same style from slide to slide. Each one was different. I was just like, that is so amazing. That's like professional level stuff. So sometimes they really grab onto it and really get into it. That gives me joy as a teacher. Rick, yes.
Yeah, one thing that you didn't mention, because we do a lot of group presentations, 3, 2, 3, 4 kids. And one thing that I got out of another book, it was called Lecture Ready 2. And what they talked about is introducing the next speaker and what they're going to talk about, thanking them.
Yeah.
And I really pushed that on some students, and I even had it on the rubric. So in their peer evaluation, did you introduce the next speaker?
Good.
Did you say thank you? And it makes a big difference. It makes a different kind of flow, especially just a cohesion, so that that someone didn't just walk in, that they that they were part of the team.
Okay,
100%
devil's
agree.
advocate. Like at a conference when I'm being presented or being introduced rather, if I have the choice, I tell them, I'll tell you what, I'll just introduce myself. Because I've had so many situations, especially very academic situations, where the organizers feel like they have to ramble on and eat up 5 minutes of my time with a kind of with a introduction that has no punch.
Well, but
Yeah,
I think,
I'm just
I
talking
think,
about. I'm talking about with students.
Oh yeah,
within
no,
the pre-
totally.
within the
and I
presentation.
think what Brig is talking about is like a transition. Like,
Yeah.
Yes,
I've
exactly.
talked about this, and next
exactly as a
Mark is going to
transition.
talk about this, and that's it.
Exactly.
Oh, that
exactly.
I
And,
think is great.
and
Yes, John?
just one other thing. If you're doing a group presentation, then the title slide at the very beginning should have all the names and what they're going to be talking about. And then you go to the first speaker. So the first speaker introduces everyone that's going to be talking. And then at the end of his talk or her talk, then they can introduce the next person. But I found that works well.
Okay, any last comments? Oh, I just, this is a minor thing. I changed shirts just before the presentation to put on purple because I didn't know this until a couple hours ago. Well, I knew this first part. Yesterday was the anniversary of women in America being able to vote. And their theme colors when they were fighting for the right were purple and green. So this is in solidarity
There you go.
of progress.
Mm.
Way to
Excellent.
go, Mark.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
feel
you.
free to ask any further questions on the Facebook page for this this session, or any other way you know how.
Mhm.
Be happy to answer more.
Snail mail.
Good job, guys. You did a good job. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Excellent.
Much, yeah.
Bye all.
Thanks.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Take care.
Bye now.
Everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Oko.